November 29, 1922, in Dorchester. Yes, it was the night before Thanksgiving, and so it was a cross between taking care of me or the turkey. Virginia Howes Moody, Howes Moody. Virginia was chosen, I heard, because that was my father's grandmother's name. The Howes was a family name. My parent was Augustus Howes Moody, and she was Esther Lillian Kimball Moody. My grandparents on my mother's side was Lillian America Adams Kimball, and my grandfather was Myron R. What the R was for, I don't know. Myron R. Kimball. Okay. On that side. On my father's side, the grandmother was Barbara Ida Barbara Taylor Moody. And then she was married again and she became Ida Baker. And my father's father was Simeon. I think it was Simeon Augustus Moody. Well, Ida Baker lived a long time. I knew her on that side. I never saw the other man. And on my mother's side, Lillian Kimball lived a long time. But I remember they had a funeral for Myron. And it was in the house. And I remember the incident, but I don't remember what he looked like. Well, my grandmother, Kimball, my mother's mother, lived down the street from us, and then she moved in we had a two-family house. She moved in with us, and basically I feel she took care of me most of my young life. And Ida Baker lived in Howardsport. So every year we went to see her rather frequently and enjoyed the summer with that aunt and grandmother, and her sister, who was Aunt Winnie, both of whom lived in Howardsport. Well, it's a long tale, but as far as we know, from the United States of America, Lillian America Adams, you see, was related to the Adams line that put the second president in the White House, John Adams. And the Taylors supposedly came from England also. My parents were very dignified citizens of the Commonwealth. Dad worked. We never called him Dad, he was Papa. Mother was at home. They both were a little, I believe the word is gregarious. Both of them belonged to local fraternal and civic organizations. In fact, it's rather interesting that if you are a fraternal person, my background being Masonic, but anyway, Mother was a young young presiding officer of the local lodge in Dorchester. My father was a young presiding officer of the men in Milton. At that time, his mother, Ida Baker, came to Boston frequently and stayed with his son. And my mother's mother lived down the street. Well, the young couple managed to date somehow, and they were married in 1914.
And then how much longer before your sister was born?
Well, my sister was born in 1917, 3 years, and I was born in 22, 18, 19, 20, 5 years later. My sister was a scholar. She read, I played. She was devoted to her family, her parents, and to me, but she was a scholar. So whenever you wanted Barbara, you had to get her out of a book. Well, she continued that academic influence all her life. She did not go to college at that point, but she persevered, and when she was in her 70s, she went back to college and got her degree. We were rather proud of Barbara, who became Mary Ann's mother. I enjoyed life, and I was, I guess, supposed to be a boy because my father adopted me, very much so. And we built a piece on our cottage together, and we repaired things in the house, and we took care of the automobile, all greasy stuff, and changed a tire and all that kind of thing. And I never really was a scholar. I never was so academic as Barbara. But I managed to grow up, get through high school, go on to college, and continue being influenced in the local civic community. When those days, you didn't have the choice you have now. So in high school, I took the straight college course all through. Then it was junior high, on into high school, college course. And then when I went to college, I majored in home economics at Framingham State University. After that, I taught school a little while, and then I decided I'd better have another degree. So I went to Boston University and majored in public relations, which now is communication, and received a master's degree in public relations from Boston University. Graduated from Framingham in '44. I have my master's degree in '54, and went on from there to add 30 credit hours beyond that in community service, most of it.
Okay.
Community relations, I believe, is the proper title. I grew up in the house I live in.
Okay.
Actually, it was not the houses are the same as they were. We have pictures of them. The station across the street from my home was rebuilt in 1927. That's when it became part of the elevated subway system. Before that, it was regular steam trains, which are now would be diesel. But they were steam trains. And the subway from Andrew to Ashmont, or really to Mattapan, is running on the regular railroad tracks.
Okay.
Then the station was rebuilt in 2 or 3 years ago, if not 4 or 5. And that is when They asked for local pictures of the station, and if you went into Shawmut Station today, you would find a picture of my sister and me in front of the original Shawmut Station. It's on the lower level. That is something that's debatable. They supposedly were average, middle class, but as both Barbara and I have grown older, we're beginning to realize they were reasonably on the upper class. They must have been, to maintain the property that they did, do the things they did, and Mother never worked. And my father did have an executive position with Baker's Supply Company called Joseph Middleby Jr. Incorporated. And he did have an executive position there. But that did not occur to us. Because on the other hand, they were frugal. We never had things that some of the other kids had. We did have an automobile, which was one of the first, I guess, from what I've heard. But we did have an automobile, and we've always had an automobile. But on the other, as I said, on the other hand, we heated the house with coal. The third floor, every winter, was given over to drying vegetables. They were on the floor in the upstairs room. So that eventually all the beans were shelled and turned into baked beans. So I don't know whether they were rich or poor. Because they did all their own cooking, made their own bread. It was always, we had a Model T Ford, if you know when Ford built that. We had I have pictures, they had an open car before that, which was some other thing. But they had a Model T. That was the first Ford.
That was the first assembly line car, right?
And then they had several Fords, and then graduated to the Oakland. Then they had an Oldsmobile. Oh, both. It was not, no. Not a great deal. I've often wondered about, no, I never was really normal growing up through grade school and high school of why didn't you come home sooner or something like that. I never was punished at the table. I could eat what I wanted. And the other thing my mother always told both of us girls, of course Barbara was 6 years older than I, so we didn't exactly relate when we were little, that nothing was too good for her family. If we broke a dish, that was all right. I mean, it wasn't all right, but it never was a major calamity. We just, that's okay, that was what we use. If you broke it, it fell, it broke, or whatever. Oh, did we have cats? Yes, we've always had at least one or more, from the time I can remember. All kinds of colors and descriptions. And at one point, oh, she probably was 14, 15 years old, Barbara had a dog. Beautiful collie. When I was a kid,
yeah.
Well, I was kind of a tomboy. I worked around the house with learned a lot about carpentry and repairing things, and at that point most of the young kids in the neighborhood were boys, and so I played baseball over there on the tunnel cap, on top of the tunnel. It's always been covered, and we all played on top of the tunnel.
Okay.
But I was very much a girl also, because at the age of 13, which was the age then, now it's 11, of course I belonged to Girl Scouts and the Order of the Rainbow for Girls, a Masonic body affiliate, which is all girls and very formal. So from then on, I was pretty much a girl. We celebrated everything we could think of. That's why I have so many things now. Oh, we celebrated. We always were made to celebrate the 4th of January, because in those days that was the inauguration of the president. We celebrated that, and then along came February, and Barbara was born on Valentine's Day. And then along came St. Patrick's Day, and Easter, and Memorial Day, and then there was the high school graduation, of course, and other graduate. Barbara's, she did go to Chandler Business School, and then, of course, we belonged to these organizations, which changed offices every year, and therefore there was always the installation, which was a formal affair, and receptions and that kind of thing. And then we went on and, let's see, we ended up with Memorial Day. And then there was 4th of July. And then we went to the cottage in the summer. And then there was September and Labor Day. And then there was Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas and back to January. Either Halloween or Christmas. What made it special?
Yeah.
Well, Halloween was just fun. We always had a pumpkin. And my father helped me cut it up with the eyes and the mouth and the teeth and take the top off. Of course, in those days you burned a candle in it, a real candle. And there were lots of young people on the street then, and everybody went out in their costume and so forth. That was long before they ever heard of trick or treat. We just had a good time. Family tradition. Thanksgiving dinner in Howard's Fort. Christmas at home. Christmas wrapping on the dining room table Christmas Eve. Sunrise service on Easter morning out at Wollaston Beach or on the top of Blue Hill. Surprisingly, birthdays were not accounted for very much.
So no birthday presents? Okay.
But again, it was such a small family. That's all there was, you see. No aunts and uncles. No cousins. Perhaps it would be a tradition. We always, we went to church on Sunday, had Sunday dinner, which was a dinner, in the dining room. And then Sunday evening, or supper time, we always had waffles.
Okay.
Traditionally, almost every Sunday we had waffles. Sunday night. Maybe it was because the waffle iron was new, I don't know. I don't remember why we had waffles, but we had waffles. Oh, my first license? Well, let's go back a bit. This friend, he probably wasn't any older than I was, but some kid, somebody, I can't remember, Richard maybe, I don't know who he was, taught me to drive. That is, how to steer and put the brake on and all. Then I was probably the usual 16 or 17. And then I had to prove to my father that I could handle the car in the hayfield in Marshfield. That's where I really learned to drive, was in Marshfield.
And that was with your dad?
So that in those days, I don't like saying that, but then you couldn't get your license until you were 21. So my first license was in November of whatever. Anyway, I was 21 years old. And that also entitled me to vote. Yes, those were important days in my life. I could drive and I could vote. I'd be glad to. It's not very interesting, except it was. And it's all hearsay. That's what I was told. Now, at that time, Boston had several newspapers, one of whom was the Boston Record-American. The Boston Record-American, apparently, as a fundraiser or something, went into real estate. They bought a lot of land in Marshfield and then sold it, sold off pieces of it. And there was a large piece of land called Marshfield Estates. And that was sublet to some company in New York, which was on the first deed. Some promoter, some developer. And they're the ones that, in due time, built houses on this piece of property. So the houses were all built by Howard something or other and sold. My family bought the lot and the house to be built. Mother and father decided they needed a new baby. Mother wasn't very healthy. So they quickly, so I've been told, built the house. The little cottage that now stands just the way it was, basically. In the spring, Mother went to stay there in June and stayed at the cottage until it got to be cold, and I was born in November. So they always have claimed that 1921-22, they built the house for me.
Where?
In the house. You were born at home then.
Okay.
27 Clementine Park.
Okay. So the midwife came to the house and delivered you? Okay. Okay.
And that's why I upset Thanksgiving dinner, because they probably had the fire for the Thanksgiving and not a bathtub for me, but anyway, I arrived. That's all I've heard.
Okay.
And then it was after that I think it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt that made Thanksgiving the fourth Thursday. Before that, it was the last Thursday of the month. My father called me Ginger. No one called me anything. I hate Ginny. And if anybody does now, as I've grown the last 50 years, I just say, don't call me that. It's Virginia or Mrs. White.
But was it okay when your dad called you Ginny?
Ginger is fine. My first lover called me Ginger. I guess because I was peppy. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay. Ginger white. Okay.
But I was ginger, yep. Well, I was my dad's best friend, probably, because we did so much together. And of course, he lived longer. Did I kick some? So he lived a lot longer than my mother, and I was with him all that time. I don't know what year it was. She was 64 years old.
Okay, but
And
you weren't too young. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it was maybe, would it be in my 20s? Would that be right? She died at Milton Hospital. I remember going. So, and it was a long time after that my father died. He died at home. If you wish to go back, my mother died in 1952. The year Marianne was born. It's educational. It's broadening of, her viewpoint on many things. It's easy. And fortunately, I have the time. I've always had the time, because I taught school and I traveled every vacation. So I had the time to do it, and I did. Well, I went to the World's Fair in Montreal, stayed with a French family, and learned more French than I ever learned at school. Back then, for school vacations, I was apt to read an ad in the newspaper and then go. That's how my friend and I, a teacher friend, how we went to Peru. They had a trip on vacation, and we went, just like that. It was probably in the 50s, a long time ago, when single girls didn't travel alone, quote. But we did. I lived a life before I was married, and I was married in '69. So the race riots and the anxiety and the travel and the living alone was all before '69. A lover, which didn't work, the normal life that anyone goes through. It was all before that. Then I got married, and I was single. Had my own money, my own car, my own job. Then I got married, and I lived with we had a very good marriage, but that ended when my husband died in 1985. And then I went back to being single again. So I just feel I have 3 chapters of my life. Yeah.
Okay.
All of which were very different. The first chapter, I just went through the normal thing. You went to school, you went to college, you got a job, you lived, you worked at the job. Second marriage, completely different. I moved out of my house for a short time, lived in Springfield, realized that things matrimonially were going fine, but financially they were not. Went back to work, came back to Boston, became benefactors to my niece, whose parents sent her to Boston to school, so she lived with us. And then she went back home and went on to college, to Purdue. But Gardner and I we were fine. And he died in 1985, and I became single again.
Okay.
And since I wasn't working, I pursued a new career called parliamentary procedure. So I'm a parliamentarian in the last chapter of my life. Or that is the present chapter. Through a fraternal organization. He was a presiding officer, and so was I. He was the presiding officer of the lodge in Springfield, and I was the presiding officer here. And as we traveled and exchanged activities, he asked me to marry him, and I did. He proposed at the restaurant in Sturbridge by saying something to the effect of, well, we go together, would you consider marrying me? Nothing very fancy. And I said, well, I'm not with the kids these days, I'm too old to teach. Yes, I'll marry you. He proposed around between November and Christmas sometime, when we went out for dinner and to a meeting probably, and we were married in April. Today I suppose you'd call him an accountant, almost a CPA. But he couldn't manage his own money. But that's irrelevant. He worked for Holyoke Wire and Cable, which was the local company in Holyoke. And the only reason he lost his job, and we became financially embarrassed a bit, the conglomerate TRW bought the firm, bought the company, and released all of the men who were eligible for a pension. It's not a hard luck story, it happens off and on. So therefore the company fired them all, put in their own staff, and that's when we came back to Boston to live. We sold the house in Springfield. Probably the assassination of John Kennedy. Well, I was teaching at the time. The children, or the high school young people, had never had any president never knew any president except Roosevelt. So when John Kennedy was elected, a young, good-looking, fascinating young father with a baby and a beautiful wife, they were in ecstasy. And then all of a sudden, their dream man was shot. Well, if the catastrophe was the way they reacted to it in school, I mean, it can't be. And then all of the teachers that were teaching then will tell you the same. They came to the teachers. They wouldn't go home. Do you think our parents know this? How did it happen? Of course, there wasn't the media that there is now. Do you know it happened? When did it, And, of course, the girls were all in tears. And it went on for days. And then, of course, they had the elaborate funeral with the with the carriage with the body in it. And it was probably the first funeral most of those kids had ever seen. Certainly one of any notoriety. And it was to me, it was a very significant event. Well, of course, everybody got over it eventually. I mean, the world calmed down, they had the funeral, they had a vice president. Truman, wasn't it Truman?
I believe so. Came
along and everything was different. And then we had a war or two and life has gone on. I thought, of course, those young people are parents with children have grown up of their own now. He was in World War II.
Okay.
Served in Guam and what's the other one out there in the Pacific? Anyway, Mary Ann wishes that I knew more. Well, I don't know more. But the book ends and the sailors and the Coast Guard people and the soldiers too, I suppose, the Army, they brought home the most peculiar things. But anyway, some of that wooden stuff that is in my house was made in the Pacific by the natives. But I don't exactly know which island, but he served in the Pacific Theater. Remember, the men that served in that war don't talk about it. Very little. You watch, once in a while they'll have one on television. Most of them were not particularly, unless they were shot outright, didn't suffer very much. They had a reasonably good time. Now even Paul, of course, Paul served in the Vietnamese War. And he admits he had a good time. Of course, Barbara served in World War II. Unless they're really crippled and end up in the VA hospital, most of them did pretty well. Barbara was away. She served in the Navy, the woman's branch for the Navy, and did computer work then. She was stationed in Washington, D.C., communication, and she could tell you, she didn't say much either, but would tell you where all the little battleships were on the screen. That kind of thing. Very. My sister was managed to engineer somehow to get leave from the Navy, from her station in Washington, to come to my graduation from Framingham. And there she was in her white uniform, full dress.
It made you proud to have your sister there?
Very proud of her. I was always proud of Barbara because she was so academic, so learned. Gosh, I mean, I never qualified that way. And yet she didn't go to college until years later when they began offering senior courses. However long, till what, 45, 6? Whenever World War II ended.
Okay.
She went in, broke my mother's heart, but she went in, told Mom, came home someday and told Mom that we didn't have any boys, she was going to enlist, and she did. She served until war was in, till they discharged everybody. She came back to Massachusetts and took then they were medical record librarian course at Mass General. Finished, graduated or whatever you completed, the requirement, and went to Maine General to manage their records department. which she did until she got married. They were Maine record, like now they have some fancy term, technological evaluation of patients or something like that. Fred something, Pinkham. Oh, Fred what? Fred Clarence. I think that's right, Fred, who, neither of whom were married, of course, before either one of them. And they had Mary Ann. Then they lived in Portland because he worked for the Maine Central Railroad, top level. And she worked at the hospital, Maine General it was then. Now it's Maine, I think it's Maine Central or Maine something. City, I guess. And they both lived in Portland and roomed out, and they got married and roomed together and moved to Damerscotta in the family, in the Pinkham family farm. Fred owned the family homestead in Nobleborough, the one they live in now, one Mary Ann lives in. That was the Pinkham homestead.
Okay,
And
I've seen pictures of it.
Fred was the only one that was left. He had a couple of brothers and a couple of sisters who would have been aunts to Mary Ann. But they both died soon after she was born. I met one of them once, that's all. So Fred was left and he inherited the family property, and Barbara went with him, and they went back and raised corn and beans and raspberries and hayfield, and I was surprised that Barbara adapted so well, but she did. I believe that you have to have a faith in God or some almighty destiny or power. The name of it does not matter. But I sincerely believe there is a destiny that forms men's lives. And there's no point in denying it. I can't make the flowers bloom. I can try with fertilizer, but there's some kind of a supernatural power that controls what we do, when the bridge falls down, or something. And it's the people that deny it and consider themselves all-powerful usually have all kinds of things physically wrong with them, bad things happen to them, because they magnify it, because they haven't got a strong enough background to say, I didn't do it. Something is controlling my life and I have to give in. I'm not in control.
Okay.
But on the more humorous side, my philosophy of life is do what you can to make you happy. Do it whenever you can, whether, do all you can to all the people you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can.
That's good.
Or else that other little quote, what is it? God, give me the strength to... Oh, I can't think of it at the moment. It's 4 lines.
I don't know it.
But anyway,
Okay.
Keep smiling. Yes, tragedy comes. Learn how to handle it. And remember that if tragedy comes, joy will also come. Well, that's what I mean. To me, normal things happen. But to other people, they're tragedy and they go to pieces. I could have, you don't mind a personal comment, I could have left Gardner 2 months after we were married. Some women would have. I had moved out of my home. I knew I was going to lose my car financially because we had money. His house was a mess. The roof didn't leak. Everything was a mess. And he offered, knowing the situation that he had planned on retirement, planned on a pension, loved this woman whom he was going to travel and do things with. He offered and pleaded to have annulment. And I said no. We were in front of the altar of God and said, till death do us die, and I will not leave you. And I didn't. And I'm happier for it.
So he lost his job right after getting married?
Right.
Within a couple of months?
Right. Yep. I know it was a couple of months because we were married in April, and I had agreed, and he'd agreed, we'd agreed, it was the best thing to do. The school department agreed to finish the school year. So that's why some of these kids call me Mrs. White, and some of them call me Miss Moody, if you meet them on the subway, all these grown-up people. So I taught from April to June, and I was supposed to move to Springfield in June. Now during that time, we moved my furniture to Springfield, what we didn't put in storage, because we had 2 sets of everything. And in June, this is silly, I'm so sorry, and I'll listen. I said no. So you could call that tragedy, I suppose. But it turned out to be a good marriage. And we went blithely on and did what we could and settled some of the debts in Springfield and came back to Boston. Because the Boston house didn't sell. If it had, I don't know what we would have done. I was hoping, now I'll admit, I was hoping it would sell. It didn't sell all the year I was engaged, or the few months. But I was hoping it would. And then when we had to sell his house, I was hoping we could sell both of them and build a home of our own. But it didn't work. So, there we are. That's the summer that we lived in Marshfield. Because we sold his house in July. For $16,000. That's all right. We enjoyed eating cereal. And then, when we came back, who delighted our doorstep but Mary Ann? And all that year she was supposed to be going to Endicott. She lived with us, really. Downstairs. The 5 rooms downstairs. For the new bride, the man that had a new wife, a young college student, and 2 sets of furniture.
Any cats?
And 2 cats. Her cat and our cat from Springfield. I mean, what could you do? We had to do it. 1 car. His car, of course.
Okay.
So as far as any other tragedy, when Barbara was living, we would both say we really had we never broke any bones, either one of us. We're not on crutches, we're not, no other real major, we never had a real major automobile accident. Our parents were never had dementia or they were active till they died. I mean, we never had any tragedy.
Okay.
Or if we did, we knew how to handle it. Well, now, you see, in her case, her mother and father both worked. And Barbara became the record librarian inspector for the state of Maine with her skills and expertise. So, there were many times she had to travel up to the Northern Hospital and way up in northern Maine, or the one over near the Vermont line, and all those. She traveled to inspect the hospital records. And she and her husband arranged to schedule these little trips during my vacation. So I had to go to Maine and take care of Marianne while Mother and Dad worked. So my relationship with Marianne is practically from the time she was born. But never could I override, never could I go beyond she's not my child.
Okay.
And to this day, that's why Marianne always, she's not my mother. There's a very fine line there. But I practically brought Marianne up in many ways. Then one whole summer, that's when I was single, she was up here. Her mother was at some kind of a meeting, three weeks in one and 2 weeks in the other, at some hotel in town. And she brought Marianne up here with her and stayed with me. 5 weeks of my summer vacation. She's a good girl. Eat 3 meals a day, any other bits that you might eat, refreshments or something, and eat 3 meals and try to have a reasonable schedule. Not eat on and off and then not eat at all the next day. That doesn't work. 3 meals a day, sleep nights, have a somewhat of stable schedule. And do everything that comes to you as an opportunity, do it. Take the risk and do it. And leave the house, yes, leave. All right, so you're not a housekeeper, so it's not immaculate. But if you're happy in doing what you're doing, just do it. Yes, I'll say something. After we were married and we had to move to Boston, I had never intended to do that. But I came back to Boston with my husband and withstood all the gossipy people who blamed me for bringing him back to Boston, making that poor man give up his home. But out of all of that, my husband met a young man, and they had a relationship that I had no part in. I knew nothing about their so-called toys. I knew nothing about why they did it. I learned a lot. He did come to Boston. It was different. And I figured that was his enjoyment, all right. He never was drunk when he came back home to me, so that was fine. And lo and behold, I have 4 wonderful children. All because we moved back to Boston.
But
Hey, your father and my husband went off at least once a month. And he never would say anything. The only thing he'd ever say when he brought in the bag once in a while, don't touch. Don't get into that.
because it was the gun bag.
Sure, we had the guns in it, but I had no more idea he had guns than the man in the moon. And of course he had a whole case. I never knew a thing. Then I began, after a while, little by little, and then of course he was kind enough to teach me how to shoot down there at Marshfield and how to handle a gun. It was all a different word. That was very different. But that was okay. So what did I get out of that inheritance? 4 wonderful young people who have made my life younger. There we go. And now not only 4, now I got 2 more. Now I got 6. And I have Anna and her husband. They are dear. Anna is a dear one. She's the oldest one. But I've befriended her and John. Of course, they lived together, I guess I told you, 16 years before they were married. A lifetime almost.
It's a very long time.
Now they have this house, beautiful house in Beverly. Okay, that's Anna. Then there's Werner Ann, who married the Jewish fellow. And they have the daughter. And then there was Paula, the youngest one, and her husband, Michael, and they have Anthony. So all in all, I have a big family.